The marble halls of Machaerus' fortress echoed with the sounds of celebration, but beneath the revelry lay a web of ambition, betrayal, and divine retribution that would reshape the course of history. In the year 28 AD, the desert stronghold perched high above the Dead Sea housed not only King Herod Antipas's garrison, but also his most controversial possession, his brother's wife, Herodias. The woman who would become synonymous with John the Baptist's execution began her journey in Rome, where she was raised in the sophisticated courts of Emperor Augustus. Born into the Herodian dynasty, Herodias was the granddaughter of Herod the Great, whose shadow still loomed large over Judea decades after his death. Her first marriage was to her uncle Herod Philip I, not to be confused with his half-brother Philip the Tetrarch, a union that produced her daughter Salome and secured her position within the complex Herodian family politics. But Herodias was not content with her life in Rome. When Herod Antipas visited his brother's household during a diplomatic mission, she saw an opportunity for greater power. Antipas ruled as tetrarch over Galilee and Perea, territories far more significant than her husband's private citizenship in Rome. The attraction was mutual, and soon they began planning a future that would violate both Jewish law and Roman custom. What many historical accounts overlook is the precarious political situation Herodias navigated. Her first husband, though wealthy, held no official position in the Roman administration. Meanwhile, Antipas had built a new capital city, Tiberias, naming it after the current emperor. He wielded real power in the region where her ancestral grandfather had once ruled as king. For an ambitious woman schooled in the ruthless politics of Rome, the choice seemed clear. The historical records, particularly those of Josephus, reveal that Herodias' decision to divorce her first husband and marry Antipas sent shockwaves through Jewish society. This wasn't merely a scandal of the heart, it was a calculated political move that violated multiple Jewish laws. The Mosaic law specifically prohibited a man from marrying his brother's wife while the brother still lived, Leviticus 18:16, a fact that John the Baptist would later use as the foundation for his public condemnation. But before John's fateful intervention, Herodias had to deal with another crisis. Antipas was already married to the daughter of King Aretas IV of Nabatea, a crucial political alliance that helped secure his southern border. The historical context here is vital. The Nabatean kingdom was a powerful force in the region, controlling important trade routes and possessing a formidable army. When Antipas divorced his Nabatean wife to marry Herodias, he not only created a personal scandal, but also initiated a political crisis that would have far-reaching consequences. The often overlooked detail in this period is the role of the Jewish religious authorities. While John the Baptist would become the most vocal critic of the marriage, he was not alone. The Pharisees and Sadducees, though typically at odds with each other, found common ground in their disapproval of the union. The marriage violated not only the letter of the law, but also represented everything they despised about Hellenistic influence on Jewish culture. Herodias brought with her to Antipas's court not only her ambitions, but also her daughter Salome, whose role in the drama would later become infamous. The young girl, likely no more than 14 at the time, was thrust into a new environment where Greek, Roman, and Jewish cultures collided in often volatile ways. The fortress of Machaerus, where much of this story unfolds, stood as a symbol of this cultural intersection, a Herodian stronghold built on an ancient Jewish site, overlooking Nabatean territories. What makes this period particularly fascinating is the parallel rise of two movements that would ultimately intersect with devastating consequences. While Herodias was establishing her power in Antipas's court, John the Baptist's influence was growing among the people. His message of repentance and his criticism of moral corruption resonated deeply with a population chafing under both Roman rule and the Herodian dynasty's Hellenistic tendencies. The Jewish historian Josephus provides crucial context often missing from the Gospel accounts. He describes John as a man whose influence over the people had become so great that Antipas feared he might lead a rebellion. This political dimension adds another layer to Herodias' eventual demand for John's execution. It wasn't merely personal vengeance, but also a calculated elimination of a threat to her husband's authority. The stage was thus set for a confrontation that would echo through history, Herodias, ensconced in her fortress home, wielding influence over her husband's court, faced off against a charismatic prophet whose words could sway thousands. The approaching clash would involve not just religious principles, but also questions of power, legitimacy, and the very nature of divine authority versus earthly rule. As the sun set over the Dead Sea, casting long shadows across the fortress walls of Machaerus, Herodias could not have known that her actions would soon set in motion a chain of events that would not only lead to John's death, but also to her own downfall. The punishment that awaited her would be as unexpected as it was complete, a divine retribution that would strip away everything she had schemed to obtain. The tension in Machaerus had been building for months. Deep in the fortress dungeons, John the Baptist's presence served as a constant reminder of the precarious nature of Herodias' position. What many historical accounts fail to emphasize is that John's imprisonment wasn't merely about his criticism of her marriage. It represented a complex political and religious challenge to the entire Herodian system of governance. The Gospel of Mark provides an intriguing detail often overlooked. Herod feared John and protected him, knowing him to be a righteous and holy man. When Herod heard John, he was greatly puzzled, yet he liked to listen to him. Mark 6:20. This creates a fascinating dynamic rarely explored in traditional tellings. While Herodias plotted John's death, her husband actually found himself drawn to the prophet's teachings. The political situation had grown more complex. King Aretas IV of Nabatea, furious over his daughter's humiliation, was gathering forces along the border. The Jewish population's unrest continued to simmer, with many viewing John as a voice of divine authority standing against corrupt leadership. Herodias found herself in an increasingly difficult position. Her husband's fascination with John threatened everything she had sacrificed to achieve. What's particularly noteworthy is the timing of the famous birthday feast. According to several historical sources, Antipas had been away in Rome for several months, dealing with various political matters and trying to maintain favor with Emperor Tiberius. His return and subsequent celebration presented Herodias with an opportunity she had long awaited. The feast itself was a carefully orchestrated affair that merged Roman excess with Jewish tradition, a combination that would have been deeply uncomfortable for many of the Jewish nobles in attendance. The ancient sources suggest that Herodias had planned every detail meticulously, including what many scholars believe was a choreographed performance by her daughter Salome. Here, we must pause to consider Salome's role in these events. Often portrayed as a seductress, historical evidence suggests she was likely still a young teenager, used as a pawn in her mother's schemes. The dance she performed would have been shocking, not primarily for its sensuality, as later interpretations suggest, but because it violated Jewish customs about modesty and proper behavior for a princess of the Herodian dynasty. The Gospel accounts provide us with the basic outline of what happened next, but archaeological evidence from Machaerus offers additional context. The fortress's main hall, where the feast would have taken place, was designed with multiple levels, allowing Herodias to observe everything while maintaining a position of apparent detachment. This architectural detail becomes significant when we consider the speed and precision with which events unfolded. When Antipas, caught up in the moment and likely influenced by wine, made his grandiose offer to Salome, Herodias' plan reached its critical juncture. The Gospel of Mark tells us that Salome rushed to consult her mother about what to request. The Greek text suggests a sense of urgency and predetermined purpose in this consultation. What's often missed in this account is the political brilliance of Herodias' move. By having her daughter request John's head on a platter, she not only ensured his death, but did so in a way that publicly bound Antipas to the decision. The presence of his guests, particularly the high-ranking military and civil officials mentioned in Mark's account, meant that he couldn't refuse without losing face. The execution itself reveals another layer of historical significance. John's death by beheading carried specific implications in both Jewish and Roman contexts. For Jews, it was considered one of the most shameful forms of execution, while for Romans, it was reserved for citizens of higher status. The method of his death thus served to both humiliate John in Jewish eyes, while paradoxically acknowledging his importance. But Herodias' triumph would prove short-lived. The immediate aftermath of John's execution sent ripples through the region that she hadn't anticipated. His disciples were allowed to claim his body, an unusual concession that suggests Antipas was already experiencing regret. More significantly, the popular response to John's death was immediate and severe. What many accounts overlook is the economic impact that followed. Pilgrimages to see John had brought significant revenue to the region. His death, combined with the growing rumors about Jesus of Nazareth, led to a shift in popular movement that affected the Tetrarchy's economic stability. The Jewish population's resentment toward Herodias and Antipas intensified, making governance increasingly difficult. Perhaps most crucially, John's execution marked a turning point in how the Jewish population viewed the Herodian dynasty. While they had long been seen as compromised rulers, the brutal death of a popular prophet shifted public opinion from mere disapproval to active hostility. This would have serious consequences as tensions with Nabatea continued to build. The Gospel of Luke provides an interesting detail about this period, mentioning that Jesus referred to Antipas as that fox, Luke 13:32. The timing of this statement, coming after John's execution, reflects the growing contempt even among the generally apolitical religious teachers of the time. Herodias' position, which had seemed secure after eliminating her most vocal critic, was actually more precarious than ever. As news of John's execution spread, even Rome took notice. The Emperor Tiberius, already suspicious of dynastic ambitions among client kings, began paying closer attention to events in Antipas's territory. This imperial scrutiny would later prove crucial in the final chapter of Herodias' story. The fortress of Machaerus, which had been the stage for her greatest triumph, would soon become a symbol of her overreach. The very walls that had witnessed John's execution would stand as a testament to the limits of earthly power when it sets itself against divine purpose. Herodias had won her immediate goal, but the price of that victory was only beginning to become apparent. The years following John's execution brought a series of catastrophes that would strip away everything Herodias had schemed to obtain. The divine retribution that befell her and Antipas unfolded not in a single dramatic moment, but through a relentless sequence of events that demolished their power, wealth, and dignity, piece by piece. The first blow came from the Nabateans. King Aretas IV, who had nursed his vengeance since Antipas's rejection of his daughter, finally found his opportunity. Historical records, particularly those of Josephus, detail a devastating military campaign that saw Antipas's army thoroughly defeated. What's often overlooked in this account is the timing. The attack came just as Roman attention was diverted by changes in Syria's governance, leaving Antipas without immediate imperial support. Many Jewish observers of the time, as Josephus records, saw this military disaster as divine punishment for John's execution. The defeat was more than just military. It represented a catastrophic loss of face for a ruler who had prided himself on his political acumen. Herodias, who had sacrificed her first marriage for Antipas's greater power, now found herself watching that power crumble. But the military defeat was just the beginning. A new threat emerged from an unexpected quarter: the growing influence of Jesus of Nazareth. The Gospel accounts provide a fascinating insight into Herodias and Antipas's state of mind during this period. When reports of Jesus' miracles reached them, Antipas was convinced that John had risen from the dead, Mark 6:16. This detail, often treated as a mere supernatural aside, reveals the deep psychological trauma that John's execution had left on the couple. The political ramifications of their situation grew more complex with the arrival of Agrippa I, Herodias' brother in the region. Here, historical sources reveal an often overlooked irony. Agrippa, who had once been so poor he had to flee his creditors in Rome, was now rising in imperial favor. The contrast between her brother's ascendancy and her husband's decline must have been particularly bitter for Herodias. Archaeological evidence from this period shows a marked decline in building projects and economic activity in Antipas's territories. Coins from the era reveal a progressive debasement of currency, suggesting growing financial difficulties. The fortress of Machaerus, once a symbol of their power, began to feel more like a prison as their options narrowed. The final act of their tragedy was sparked by Herodias herself, in what ancient sources suggest was an attempt to reclaim their fading glory. When Agrippa was granted the title of king by Emperor Caligula in 37 AD, Herodias could not bear the idea of her brother outranking her husband. Archaeological evidence from Rome's administrative records confirms what Josephus tells us. She pushed Antipas to petition Caligula for the same royal title. This fatal miscalculation revealed how far Herodias had fallen from her once shrewd political instincts. Agrippa, demonstrating the same ruthless family dynamics that Herodias had once employed, sent letters to Caligula accusing Antipas of conspiracy against Rome. Evidence was presented showing that Antipas had stockpiled enough weapons for 70,000 men, a detail confirmed by contemporary Roman military records. What followed was more than just a political defeat. It was the complete annihilation of everything Herodias had spent her life pursuing. Antipas was unable to defend himself effectively before Caligula, and the emperor's judgment was harsh. The tetrarch was stripped of his territories and wealth, and sentenced to exile in Gaul, modern-day France. Here occurs one of the most poignant moments in Herodias' story, one often overlooked in simpler tellings. When Caligula, in recognition of her brother Agrippa's loyalty, offered to exempt her from punishment, Herodias made the one choice that history has viewed with admiration. She chose to accompany her husband into exile. The woman who had once abandoned her first husband for power now chose to stand by her second husband in disgrace. The historical record grows faint after their exile, but archaeological evidence from Gaul suggests they lived in the city of Lugdunum, modern-day Lyon. The contrast between their final circumstances and their former glory could not have been more stark. From their palace overlooking the Dead Sea, they found themselves in the unfamiliar cold of Gaul, dependent on a modest imperial pension for survival. The spiritual implications of their fate were not lost on their contemporaries. The same woman who had demanded John's head on a platter now found herself with no plate to call her own. The ruler who had imprisoned the prophet in a fortress now found himself constrained to a foreign city. The couple who had defied religious law for their marriage now faced its dissolution in poverty and obscurity. The legacy of Herodias extends far beyond her role in John's death. Her story stands as a testament to the futility of opposing divine purpose for worldly gain. The Jewish communities of the time saw in her downfall a clear message about divine justice, that it may not strike like lightning, but rather works through the patient unfolding of consequences. Perhaps the most profound spiritual lesson from Herodias' story lies in its pattern of choice and consequence. Each step that led to her downfall came from her own decisions, each one seemingly justified by ambition or necessity at the time. The gradual nature of her punishment mirrors the gradual nature of her choices, a powerful reminder that catastrophic ends often come through a series of seemingly reasonable compromises. For modern readers, Herodias' story raises uncomfortable questions about power, ambition, and moral compromise. Her final choice to accompany Antipas into exile suggests that even after everything, some capacity for nobility remained. This complexity makes her not just a villain in a cautionary tale, but a deeply human figure whose choices and their consequences continue to resonate. The fortress of Machaerus still stands today, its ruins overlooking the Dead Sea. Archaeological excavations continue to uncover new details about the events that unfolded there. But perhaps its greatest value lies in its role as a monument to the truth that power, no matter how carefully accumulated, cannot stand against divine purpose. In the end, Herodias' punishment was not just the loss of her position and wealth, but the recognition, too late, of how completely she had misunderstood the nature of true power and authority.